How much do I need to retire? This is one of the most searched questions on the internet. But the irony is that there is no answer to this question because no one knows what will happen in the future. What will happen with inflation, the stock market? What support will my family need? How long will I live? The lack of answers to these questions leaves many people paralyzed by fear. A fear that keeps them working much longer than they need to. When you first start working, you're young and healthy and have an abundance of time that you're more than willing to trade for money. And as you progress through life making this trade and building assets, you'll eventually get to a point where your time and health become the most scarce resources. But in the face of all these unknowns, people continue to make this trade for much longer than they need to. Often until someone close to you falls ill or dies and forces you to wake up to your own mortality. But if the future is so uncertain, how can we have any confidence that we have reached this point? Well, the answer is flexibility. Accept the fact that you will never be able to plan for everything and build flexibility in your plan to handle whatever life throws at you. And in this video, I'm going to show you how, by understanding your options and being flexible, you can retire much earlier and with more confidence than you would have ever thought possible. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is James. I am a financial planner and it is my job to help people prepare for and navigate through retirement. The 4% rule is the most widely used tool for gauging whether you have reached that critical point and have built up enough assets to retire. It was developed by Bill Bengen back in 1994 based on an analysis of historical stock market data, and it states that if you retire with an investment portfolio of £100,000, you should be able to draw £4,000 each year whilst adjusting for inflation, and even in the worst of scenarios, this should still be sustainable. Going by this, if you wanted an income of £20,000 a year, you would need a portfolio of £500,000, and if you wanted 40k, you'd need $1 million. I like this rule because in the face of all this uncertainty, it gives us a simple figure that we can use as a North Star to guide us on our journey. But what I don't like is the fact that this rule suggests that there is only one way to solve this problem. Save more money. Save a lot more money. I mean, I don't know about you, but £1 million for 40 grand a year sounds like a hell of a lot of money. When in reality, you can confidently retire with way less than this, so long as you are willing to be flexible and adapt if you need to. And by understanding the different ways that you can go about solving this problem and just how flexible you can be, you'll be much more confident in your ability to adapt to whatever life throws at you. Let me demonstrate with an example. Fred and Rosie are both 47 years old. Fred currently has £175,000 in his pension and is contributing £10,000 a year. Rosie has a pension of £80,000 but is no longer working, and they also have £50,000 in ISAs. Each of these accounts is invested in a globally diversified portfolio of 80% stocks and 20% bonds, and their goal is to retire at 55 with a net retirement income of £40,000 per year. With the 4% rule, this would require them to have a £1 million investment portfolio. So over the next 8 years until retirement, their investments are going to have to grow a lot. And what are the chances of that? Well, no one knows what will happen in the future, but to give us a guide, we can use some software that I often use with my clients to look back in history and backtest this plan against the last 100 years of stock market data to see just how successful they would have been. And if I enter Fred and Rosie's details into this, these are the results. It doesn't look good. The solid blue line represents the median scenario, which has their assets growing from £300,000 up to a peak of 650k at retirement. And then once they start drawing an income, it slowly depletes until they run out of money at age 79. Although in some scenarios, they would have got more lucky, with this lighter blue line representing the 10th percentile, which has their assets peaking at £820,000 before eventually running out in their 90s. This view here gives us more insight into the historical data that underpins this model, demonstrating the highest levels of sustainable income that could have been drawn if this plan had been started at any month over the last 100 years. And we can see that only in a handful of scenarios from the 1920s would they have been able to draw more than £40,000 sustainably. So yes, they might get lucky and this plan might work, but we don't go into this type of planning expecting to be lucky. It's the downside scenarios that we care about, which is also why the x-axis goes all the way up to 101, as between them they actually have a 1 in 10 chance of reaching that age, which is a downside scenario that we need to plan for. This score up here shows us that in only 7% of historical scenarios would this plan have been successful, whilst in 93% it would have failed, which is not surprising given that the 4% rule suggests that we need 1 million. But this is where the 4% rule starts to fall down. Firstly, the rule does not take into consideration state pensions, and Fred is set to get a full state pension whilst Rosie is set to get a third of it. And when we factor these into the plan, we can see that the success rate jumps up to 43%, with the median scenario lasting into their 90s. With this, there are many more scenarios in which they could have executed this plan without a problem. In fact, in 30% of these scenarios, they would have ended up with more than 600 grand left over. But as I said, if we get lucky, we get lucky. The upside scenarios will take care of themselves. But it's this 57% of failures that we need to focus on and assess what we could do to make them work if we need to. As you are about to see, there are so many different levers that we can pull to solve this problem, and finding the right lever will depend on your own individual preferences. So as we go through each of these options, I want you to think about them in the context of your own situation and ask yourself, which of these compromises would you rather make? Firstly, if between now and 55, Fred and Rosie experience a poor sequence of returns and start to lag behind, Fred could simply work for a bit longer. If he worked for just 1 more year, the success rate jumps up to 60%, 2 more years, it jumps to 70%, 3, 74%, and if he worked until 61, well then we'd get into the 90% range, which is where most people start to feel comfortable. But what if Fred absolutely loathes his current job and can't stand the thought of having to work for another 6 years? Well, as an alternative, instead of retiring completely at 55, he could instead find some more sustainable part-time work that fits around his lifestyle. And if between the two of them, they could earn an extra £30,000 a year between 55 and 65, they could increase their chances of success to 90%. But perhaps they think that £30,000 is too much of a stretch and they're both desperate to stop working entirely. Well, as another alternative, they could downsize at some point in the future. And to make this work, if they downsized at 65, they would need to release £300,000 of equity from their home. For many people, that would be a pretty hefty downsize. So if that's not possible and they don't like any of the other options, they might just have to reduce their retirement income. If they reduced it from £40,000 to 35k, the success rate would jump up to 71%, down to 30k and it's up to 84%, and with £27,000 a year, they would get to 90%. When thinking about each of these options in the context of your own situation, there are probably some that seem more realistic than others. Perhaps you enjoy work and you love where you live, so working those extra 6 years until 61 is a much better trade than having to move home. Or perhaps your career enables you to go part-time more easily, or maybe you have a side gig or hobby that you can see yourself making income from in retirement. The first thing to realize is that there is no single right answer. It all depends on your own individual preferences. And the second is that you'll only be able to decide which is the best option for you once you have laid them all out on the table in front of you. If you were just using the 4% rule, you might think that the only option is to save more money or to reduce income in retirement, when actually there are so many ways to solve this problem, many of which we haven't even looked at here. And what's more is that you don't need to choose just one. You can do a bit of everything. As an example, to make this work, Fred could work until 57. Then from 57 until 60, work part-time, earning £20,000 per year. And then finally, at 65, downsize and release £150,000 worth of equity from their home. If you understand the options that are available to you, you can mix and match them to find a balance that fits. Despite all of this historical data, we still have no idea what will actually happen in the future. But by going through this process and understanding the different ways that we can adapt if we need to, we can get comfortable with our ability to handle whatever life throws at us. Even though Fred and Rosie don't have to make any decisions right now, by exploring the paths that they would prefer to go down if they need to, they can start preparing for it. If Fred thinks he would prefer to work part-time in a more sustainable job that fits into his lifestyle, then he can start researching his options and developing the skills he needs to make that change in the future. Or if downsizing is on the cards, they could start preparing their house for sale and doing work to add value to it. Or they could even look at taking equity out of their home ahead of time and investing that elsewhere, knowing that they'll be able to pay off that mortgage when they come to sell the house. The future is uncertain, and no amount of planning will be able to eliminate that entirely. But by focusing on the things that you can control and the options that you have, you'll feel much more confident in your ability to adapt to whatever life throws at you. Now, unfortunately, the software that you've seen in this video is quite expensive and only really available to financial advisors. But in this video here, I introduce you to a linear cash flow model that I have built that you can plug your own details into to visualize your current path and start exploring what options might be best for you. So please do check it out.